originally coming out for the Apple II on the date of October 3rd, 1989. This is the revolutionary platforming game, Prince of Persia. Today we'll be looking at the Commodore Amiga port, which was developed and published in America by Broderbund. I believe it to have been worked on simultaneously with the DOS version, so I don't believe either is a port of the other. But if anything, I would say that the DOS version is more taking from the Amiga version, if you ask me personally. All of my research is pointing to a September-October-ish release in 1990 for both DOS and Amiga. There's some conflicting information there, most notably from the creator Jordan Mechner himself, who seems to think early 1990 for DOS and Amiga, but all actual physical evidence seems to point more towards the end of 1990. But we'll get into that more a little bit later on. Let's start off by taking a look at the manual. There's a couple of versions of the manual I happened across, and I'd say I'm much more of a fan of this one with the woman on it. The guy, the one here for the guy, oh my god, I don't know who said that one was okay to publish, but I think you're nuts. That one is just goofy beyond belief. Although that is the iconic kind of pose that you think of with this game and its main character sprite. But both manuals feature largely the same kind of information in both of them. It is a time of darkness. While the Sultan is off fighting a foreign war, his Grand Vizier Jaffar has seized the reins of power. Throughout the land, the people groan under the yoke of tyranny and dream of better days. You are the only obstacle between Jaffar and the throne, an adventurer from a foreign land, innocent of palace intrigues. You have won the heart of the Sultan's lovely young daughter, and in so doing, you have unwittingly made a powerful enemy. On Jaffar's orders, you are arrested, stripped of your sword and possessions, and thrown into the Sultan's dungeons. As for the princess, Jaffar gives her a choice and an hour to decide: marry him or die. Locked in her room high in the palace tower, the princess rests all her hopes on you. For when the last sands drain from the hourglass, her choice can bring only a throne for the Grand Vizier, a new reign of terror for his long-suffering subjects, and death for the brave youth who might have been Prince of Persia. So Prince of Persia is definitely of historical note when it comes to gaming and computer gaming in particular. It would receive ports to a multitude of systems, both early and late in its lifetime, including the Atari ST, Amstrad CPC, TurboGrafx 16, the Game Boy, FM Towns, Master System, Super NES, Sega CD, NES, the Macintosh, Game Gear, Sega Genesis, Game Boy Color, and later on it would even get, stuff to the Wii and Nintendo 3DS, all of that jazz. Even not so long ago, I think 2010, it got a fan port to the Commodore 64, but here we're not really thinking about the fan ports, we're thinking about the official stuff here. And despite its many ports to consoles, I would deem this a clear example of a game designed on a computer. I wouldn't necessarily say computer platformer, because many computer platformers were definitely going after the console market. They were very much designed to emulate Mario or emulate Sonic, as your Commander Keen or your Jazz Jackrabbits and stuff. When I think computer platformers, I tend to think shareware quality. But this game just screams to you, I was designed very differently on a computer. And it's most noteworthy for its animation style, the rotoscoped animation, which was originally from Jordan Mechner, the creator of this game. It was originally from him with the game Karateka, although he pronounces Karateka very differently. I don't know how you pronounce a game so clearly based on karate, anything but karateka. I don't know how he does it, but I don't even know. It's more like karateka or something like that. But regardless of pronunciation, Karateka was a game for the Apple II that would be ported to all kinds of 8 bits. Most noteworthy, the Commodore 64 version, I am sure, which used this very fluid, lifelike animation, which was basically because Mechner himself could not animate. He did not have that, ability inside of him, so he needed to cheat a little bit. So he would take film footage from various different movies, or sometimes he would have people model for him. His brother in this game was the model for our main character. And the sword fighting here, it was taken directly from a scene from the 1938 film The Adventures of Robin Hood. So he would use a VCR on its freeze frame setting and go frame by frame, and he would take pictures with a 35mm camera setup. And he developed those, and he would study those, and used some kind of digitizer in some cases, and take that footage into the Apple II. All of his games originally, I think he only created 2 games technically, but those 2 games were both on the Apple II, and he would work with the outlines that he collected from all this footage. So what you get is unwittingly a revolutionary animation style in his 2 original games.
Take that, Mr. Dorito Man.
Mr. Dorito Man appears courtesy of Miss Mad Lemon. I watched a playthrough of her playing this a while ago, and she likes to refer to the enemies as different flavors of Doritos. So I think this guy was Cool Doritos or something. She's got some very funny names for some of these characters. So what do you say we check out some historical context, courtesy of magazine reviews from back in the day? We'll start with Amazing Computing, an American magazine, $3.95 and $4.95 in Canada, December of 1990. So who out there wants to go to the Amiga World Expo in Boston, Massachusetts, Seattle, Washington, Raleigh, North Carolina, San Diego, California, Detroit, Michigan, and Toronto, Ontario? Venues are not listed, but for $30 you get 3 hours of a novice or expert training. The review, courtesy of Bradley Andrews. Prince of Persia from Broderbund is running and jumping arcade adventure platform game set in the Middle East many years ago. Some villain has taken over the kingdom, and only you can eliminate him, free the land, and save the princess from a horrible marriage. Initially, I was turned off by the game because the controls were a bit difficult to work, but after talking to someone else who had some experience playing it, I gave it another shot and was quite pleased. While I did not make it to the end, I did have a good time. The graphics are simple, fit the theme, and look nice. Prince of Persia is worth playing if you are reasonably adept with a joystick and like a little strategy with your action. Let's switch over to info bi-monthly December/January. So it's December of 1990/January of 1991, doing their top 25 games of 1990. There's an interesting piece from senior editor Tom Malcolm here. I believe Tom was responsible for one of a not-so-liked review for myself for Hostages, a game I reviewed not so long ago. But let's see what he has to say here. The state of games. The second bust. I've heard from several sources that the bottom is starting to drop out of the cartridge game market again, just like it did in 1983. I'm not too surprised. The Nintendo organization has kept prices far too high, and their stranglehold on the market has produced exactly the effect they tried to avoid. The company initiated a policy of not selling blank cartridges to any company whose games hadn't been approved by their review committee. It worked for a while, but when any small group of people has the power to decide which games, or anything else for that matter, will hit the market and which ones won't, the ones that do get released tend to be very conservative, very much alike, and ultimately uninteresting. Very interesting to contrast that with his thoughts on Hostages, actually, in which he hated it because it was unique and going after a topic that he deemed is too close, too soon to go after. It's very, very interesting there. There's undoubtedly another factor at work in the current bus: dissatisfaction with 8-bit technology. The 16-bit cartridge machines have been on the market long enough for most people who play cartridge games to have at least seen them. The dazzling graphics and stereo sound make the old 8-bit NES at home look pretty lame. The bazillions of kids who have been playing Nintendo games for the past few years are growing up, and they expect more from games these days, not just more of the same games. There's a strong analogy to the Commodore 64 here. There are still millions of them in use, but we're not seeing much, if any, new software for them. The same thing is likely to happen with the NES. The number of new titles will dwindle and then stop, not immediately, but within the foreseeable future, which brings us to the question of what direction computer-based entertainment is going to take. And he goes into, like, handhelds. He doesn't think handhelds will ultimately be all that successful. Very wrong about that, I would say, although some of the particular ones he mentions weren't successful. He thinks the Commodore CD-TV is going to be wonderful and start a new evolution of games and stuff. He was wrong about that one. He thinks ultimately computer games will cease to exist because we will be, involved in these just amazing CD titles that, go beyond computers altogether, and we'll all be consumed into these CD things. Again, very, very much wrong about that prediction. But he does mention like high definition TV and stuff like that, things that would indeed come eventually, although they would come much later than 1991 here. An interesting piece from Tom there, but ultimately the entire premise for the article is flawed because there was no second game bust. The Nintendo market did not crash. Again, NES would fade a little bit. Nintendo would stop making Nintendo cartridges, NES cartridges, as soon as the Super Nintendo came out. But third-party developers were making NES carts, until like 94, I think. And the 16 bits would explode from this point forward. So ultimately, the entire premise is flawed. But interesting historically to take a look at what the computer people were thinking at that particular moment in time. Let's get to the review. Again from Tom Malcolm. Broderbund is taking game animation to new levels, and Prince of Persia is a prime example. Their Typhoon Thompson is another. Going the opposite direction from the ever larger sprites used in most arcade games, the figures are small scale, but the animation of them is so well done and so human-like that they are positively alive with personality. Jordan Mechner's research has paid off in a game that is not only fun to play, but even more fun to watch. The plot is standard Arabian Nights fare. Your mission is to escape and rescue a princess who is held captive in a tower high above. The game itself isn't anything we haven't seen before, but the execution is exemplary. It is more puzzle than combat-oriented, so you'll exercise your wits as much as your joystick skill. My only wish is that the backgrounds had been a little more detailed and varied. As arcade action games go, Prince of Persia is certainly one of the best, if only for the animation. 4 out of 5 stars. Broderbund, 17 Paul Drive, San Rafael, California, 94903. Even got the phone number for you. American NTSC game through and through. Somehow Shadow of the Beast got 5 stars. Okay. In their top 25 games of 1990, you'll find that many of Info's top 25 games of 1990 are also reviewed in this issue. This isn't really too surprising, since the holiday season is when game companies do their best business. Consequently, they often introduce their best games late in the year. Our list is heavy with titles that make use of the Amiga's special graphics and sound capabilities. This is intentional. Though many fine games have been ported to the Amiga from MS-DOS originals, we prefer to give the laurel wreaths to those companies that are dedicated to wringing the full potential out of our favorite machine. After all, if we wanted to play MS-DOS games, we'd get an IBM clone. Likewise with the Nintendo games. NES games lack depth, mostly involve maze running and object grabbing. When you own a real computer, you want your games to involve a little more challenge. Ouch! Good to know what they were thinking at the time, but your lack of respect for the console market, it would be your downfall in the types of games you are thinking of and how wonderfully in-depth they are. They would be destroyed because of your your dismissal of the console markets. You just insulted them. You never actually tried to draw them into your world. And that is why today you just don't get the games like you used to on computers, do you? So in their top 10, Shadow of the Beast 2 would get number 1. Interesting. Typhoon Thompson, another Broderbund release, got number 3. The Immortal from Electronic Arts 4. Prince of Persia, number 5. Broderbund is the second of 2 Broderbund titles to make our top 10. Excellent graphics, animation, and gameplay. It Came from the Desert, number 7. Shido, number 8. Pipe Dreams and Bandit Kings of Ancient China. That is related to Romance of the Three Kingdoms. I have experience with that one. Rounds it out of the top 10 list. You know what else was released in 1990 in the console world? Super Mario Bros. 3. And at least when it comes to this particular info list of top 10 computer Amiga games at that time, I would say Super Mario 3 outclasses them all. At least in fun. Maybe not in terms of ingenuity, but overall fun, I would say Super Mario 3. So here we have a little plot device in your doppelganger, other self, shadow figure in most versions. Interestingly, in terms of this Amiga version, it is where the Amiga and DOS ports most differ from each other, is that doppelganger figure that you saw there. So let's use this opportunity to check out a comparison I made myself of the two different versions. Played through the entire DOS version just to get a feel of the differences between the Amiga, and mostly it's that doppelganger kind of thing. He's a shadow figure, as is the original Apple II version, and most of the ports would have a shadow figure. For some reason, they decided to kind of invert the colors of the main guy here for the Amiga version. It actually makes more sense. With the mirror there, you're jumping into it, you're getting a doppelganger. It makes more sense for it to be an inversion of yourself, an other self. It makes very little sense to have it be a shadow person. I think that was a limitation or something with the Apple II. That was the original purpose of the more shadow figure rather than a full, reverse figure kind of thing. But I don't know. It's peculiar why there's that difference is there, but it is there. My thoughts on the different versions. Well, number 1 is I love Apple II ports, no matter what. I don't think you can say the Apple II original of any game is best on the Apple II. It's one of those things, okay? It's using only 8 colors, I believe. It's not easy to port, I don't believe. It's not like you can't do a straight port from the Apple II to anything. So no matter what you get with a port from an Apple II original is always going to be different, at the very least. It's probably going to be better. Again, I don't think, probably never was, a port from Apple II to any other system that was worse than the Apple II. But lots of great designers came from an Apple II history, so there are, great Hall of Fame worthy games that came from the Apple II, like Might and Magic, was originally on the Apple II, and it was ported to several other systems, better on other systems. I couldn't possibly say anything bad about an Apple II original port myself. And I don't mean that to knock Apple II stuff at all on the original system. I mean, I'm absolutely positive they're all worth playing on the original system if you happen to have an Apple II, but I'm also 100% positive they are all at least better looking, if not playing better as well, on other systems. It's a great thing. It's just one of those happenstances that all Apple II originals, you gotta change them. You gotta change them for the other systems. You can't straight port them. Therefore, I love the ports of Apple II games. Now, the Amiga and DOS versions are most similar to each other. All the other versions, including the Atari ST and whatever, you name it, Sega Genesis, whatever, they all look very different. It's very debatable what looks better. I think if I was an Atari ST fan, I'd be happy at the very least that it looks different than the DOS and Amiga versions. I personally would say the Amiga and DOS versions look better. I think this is the iconic look. When I think of this game, I think of the Amiga and DOS versions of the game, regardless of the other ports. But, they are all different from each other, whereas these two versions are identical for the most part, which firmly states to me that it was done in-house in America by Broderbund for both systems simultaneously. Some online sources are stating Domark, the European publisher, as the designer for the Amiga version. BS. And this would most easily be illustrated to you all by showing you both versions in both modes simultaneously on the screen at the same time. The top right is the game in NTSC mode, 320 by 200, filling an entire 4:3 display. You'll see the seconds tick at both versions. PAL version bottom right, 320 by 200 inside of 320 by 256, which is an effective 16:9 aspect ratio, widescreen aspect ratio. Both of these started at the exact frame before it hit 60 seconds left. Built-in clock on both of them. And you will see as the seconds tick down, the PAL version is going more and more behind the NTSC version. That's not real-life seconds, what you are seeing on the bottom right. Top right is actual real-life seconds. This full-heartedly says that Prince of Persia was developed by Broderbund in America, in-house, not by Domark in the UK. Not only does it not make sense that the two versions that look identical were somehow done overseas from each other, but once you put the actual facts and you stack them up side by side, sometimes if it looks right, then it probably is right. And, when you look at the two versions, they absolutely scream in-house, simultaneous development, American Amiga game. So put your Amigas or emulators in NTSC mode. Play them as designed. Now, there is slowdown on the clock. The more that is actually going on, the clock will slow down more and more, which is a good thing. It's a good thing that sometimes some games don't actually do that. Some games, when the game itself slows down, the clock actually remains at the correct speed, which is awful for playing it. But that's why I showed a static screen for the clock comparisons. PAL version would have slowed down as much, if not more, because of more resources. 320 by 256. Even if most of it is black, it's still more resolution there. So the more resources devoted to the CPU and such, the faster the game will go. Again, if you get an accelerator, that the slowdown will be stopped, but your clock speed will always be the same. So even if you have an accelerator, that clock speed is going to be wrong on a PAL machine. So switch them into NTSC mode. And to finish my thoughts on the DOS and Amiga versions in-house, and I'm thinking the Amiga was done as the main machine, actually, because again, if you think the 256 color VGA DOS version is somehow the original, and they both look identical to the what I believe is only 16 color Amiga version. I don't think this is even a 32 color Amiga game. From what I see, counting colors, I think this is only 16 colors, honestly. But if you think somehow that the Amiga version did somehow a remarkable job of porting it to match the DOS graphics at 16 colors, then you know what? That DOS version wasn't so hot, now was it? It's not 256 colors. No way, no how is the DOS version using 256 colors. It's, at the very least, it's using a 16-color VGA mode, despite, and it says 256 colors in setup when you, mess with the graphics settings. It says 256 colors. Everybody thinks it's 256 colors. It's VGA, but it ain't no 256 colors. And to me, that speaks of either a 16-color VGA mode from the get-go, or it speaks to me that the Amiga version was the primary machine. I think simultaneous. I don't think either of them are ports, technically, but I do believe the Amiga version. Broderbund has a history with the Amiga, and mostly with the Commodore 64, but, they put their all into the Amiga version. Shuffle Puck Cafe, best on Amiga. Okay, there's no reason to think that that the DOS version is not actually based off the Amiga version, if you ask me. All right, we've got some more magazines to check out from January of 1991, Amiga World. This review from John Ryan, set against the backdrop of an Arabian castle, Prince of Persia, is a superb graphic and sound feast. Too bad its controls are only half-baked. The running, leaping, and fighting is fluid and realistic. You'll need dexterity, good hand-eye coordination, and problem-solving skills. You will succeed only after you have learned how to effectively duck, climb, and jump, which leads me to my complaint about Prince of Persia. The joystick operations is perhaps the poorest of any action game I have played. Needless to say, my character died 1,000 untimely deaths until I finally became used to the unwieldy operation. Likewise, you should expect to lose more than a few lives in swordplay, for if you accidentally press the joystick down, your man will promptly put his sword away and the attacking guard shows no mercy. As much as I dislike the controls, I love the graphics, animation, and sound. The digitized sound effects are equally impressive, ranging from screams to running footsteps, crashing stones, lifting gates, and more. In fact, if it were not for the poor joystick control, I'd nominate Prince of Persia as the action game of the year. $39.95. Joystick required. Well, perhaps it wouldn't make the action game of the year, but in November of 1991, it would get into Amiga World's Best of the Year. Number 5, Prince of Persia, a stunning game set in the era of the Arabian Nights. Prince of Persia finds you in the bowels of a palace, trying to make your way through multiple levels in search of a kidnapped princess. Your ability to avoid traps and your sword fighting skills, that is, your joystick dexterity, go a long way in determining your success or failure. Once past the frustrating joystick operation, you will enjoy this game immensely. Gorgeous graphics and sound. The movement is so realistic that the joystick almost feels like an extension of your arm. I'm curious how they would put those two conflicting statements about the controls together like that. It's awful controls, but you'll love it anyway, followed by it's so great that it feels like an extension of your arm. That's curious to put those two together like that, but yeah. In America, this game rated as a game of the year, number 5 for both info of 1990 and number 5 in Amiga World for 1991. 2 separate years ranked in the top games. Now, as much as I dislike talking about controls in my reviews, well, they are certainly worth discussing, as Amiga World noted there. I wouldn't call them awful like Amiga World did. I would say, it's designed that way. Just like Winter Games, and Dragon's Lair, certain games of that era, especially in the arcades and computers, they had difficult controls designed that way on purpose, and I believe this game certainly falls in that category. Now, you'll get used to them. You can get used to them, but even me, and I've played this game prior in the past, it's been a while, but when I came back to it here, and you saw in the beginning the first level, and very few deaths that you see in this playthrough were me just wanting to show you some deaths. I died because I couldn't remember how to control the game. You relearn it every single time you play it for the most part. And even in these playthroughs, like my video review, and then I went again to do some pictures for my Shot 97 Retro.blogspot.com review. When I'm doing that, again, you have moments of failure, utter failure. And the time limit in this game, while it seems really good, it just takes a few mess-ups, and then you get stuck. You just keep messing up at the same part over and over again until you finally conquer it. Just that fat guard, just go to that fat guard, and it just takes him to really, really lower your time limit quite a bit. Controls are not intuitive, but I wouldn't call them bad as much as, this is what this game is designed for, and you will get used to it while you are playing. That is part of this particular game's challenge, not necessarily a thing to demean it for. Personally, for me, I find it best controlled on a computer, specifically the Amiga for me, because on the Amiga I have a micro-switched joystick, awesome Wiko Ergo stick. I love that joystick, and to me it feels, you can hear the clicking in the background. It feels like it's best suited for that kind of a joystick. I played this game all the way through on DOS, and I played it in DOS on a gamepad. My joystick for DOS, I have a joystick and I have a gamepad hooked up to my DOS computer. And the joystick is a flight stick kind of thing, the Sidewinder 3D Pro. Awesome for quite a lot of DOS games. Not for this game, I would say. And a gamepad usually fills out, most of the games. But for this particular game, I would say a micro-switch joystick would be your best control mechanism. And obviously, the consoles are going to go with the gamepad as well. It can be done with the gamepad, but I'd say micro-switch joystick is the best controls. Plenty more to get to from December of 1989 Computer Gaming World. Good Night, Sweet Prince by Charles R. Day, covering the original Prince of Persia on the AppleII, 128K RAM required, 34.95. The Sultan is away, fighting to keep barbarian feet on the proper side of the Tigris. And wouldn't you just know, his most trusted Grand Vizier has seized the throne. That dirty rat Jaffar has also seized the Sultan's daughter and demanded that she marry him. She's got an hour to say yes or to join her lover in the palace prison and a death sentence. Never mind that a sultan rules over a sultanate, not a kingdom. Never mind that it makes no sense to have guards in a dungeon like this. How do they get there? How do they go home at night if the blasted thing's inescapable? How do they get food? Never mind that the Sultan, who is off killing foreigners, would probably prefer to see his daughter married to Jaffar than to a rascally foreigner who's just killed several dozen of his best guards and his Grand Vizier. God, is this guy trying to fill up some word count or what? I mean, really, did those old Thief of Baghdad movies make sense? The point is, they were loads of fun. To quote the package, Mechner breaks new ground with animation so uncannily human it must be seen to be believed. This would be the height of marketing arrogance if it weren't quite simply true. There's no new technology here, just imagination, elbow grease, hours at the keyboard, and TLC. Jordan Mechner deserves all the praise he's going to get for this one. Prince of Persia succeeds at being more than a running jumping game, in other words, a goosed-up Nintendo game, because it captures the feel of those great old adventure films. In reality, a running jumping game is what it is. There's a good deal of sword combat, too, but within that genre, Prince of Persia is a tremendous achievement. Make no mistake, Prince of Persia is the lightest of light entertainment. There's no great brain drain here and no social commentary, but what people do often forget is how difficult it is to be merely entertaining and just how much fun light entertainment can be. Star Wars was light entertainment, after all, and Prince of Persia is the Star Wars of its field. Speaking of arrogance... I can't refute any of that. I probably feel about the same. But at the same time, I would never say those words, as that is the height of arrogance right there in that review. Now, after that 1989 review, Prince of Persia would not be mentioned in Computer Gaming World for a long time. The IBM version did not get mentioned. The Amiga version did not get mentioned. It never showed up in any of its sales charts or anything like that. But it would get mentioned in the 150 best games of all time list. from November of 1996. A list I love coming back to because these really are, in my view, some of the best computer games of all time. And Prince of Persia makes this list at number 84, Broderbund, 1990. Call it Broderbund or something. They definitely misspelled the company name there. An acrobatic platformer with amazingly fluid action, Prince of Persia lets you become the legendary Thief of Baghdad. And they are using either the Amiga or IBM versions there. That is not from the AppleII. And its inclusion in this list is made all the more special because there really is not very many platformers in this list of 150 best games. You don't see too many of them. If you do see them, they're of, like, the Lode Runner there. They're of the 64 era, 8-bit variety. Not too many 16-bit computer platformers will you see on this list. So it's all the more special because it's a very rare platformer to make this list. And be sure to check out number 92 in the annotations there. Defender of the Crown, Jim Sack's spectacular artwork and dazzling animations in this simple strategy game showed Cinemaware could live up to its name. I don't believe I showed this particular page in my Defender of the Crown review, but check out the Defender of the Crown review, one of my personal favorites of my own. And a FA-18 Interceptor will be coming rather soon, I think, as well. To me, this is what I think of when I think of computer platforming games, 16-bit computer platform. I think different, all right? I'm telling you all, I don't care what your attitudes about the console market are. If you do not respect those games, you are nuts. Millions more bought console games than computer games. I don't care what platform. I don't care if it was DOS. I don't care if it was Amiga. I don't care what it was. The NES, I don't care where you were. I don't care if you were in America or in Europe. The NES destroyed all computer games in sales. And yes, there was lots of junk there. And there was incredible amounts of junk on computer as well. Computer games were utterly fantastic. The strategy games, the simulations, the role-playing games, wonderful. But if you get your kick out of platformers and you don't have any respect for the console market, you are just trying to fulfill, some childhood love of what you were born with. You don't understand the actual games. The best platform games were made for the consoles, and unfortunately, the designers of those games were usually strangled by Nintendo not to make games for computer systems or even other, even other consoles. So, we didn't get a lot of great. I got them because I had console and the computer, and that's why I liked it. I very much. It's a wonderful viewpoint, I think, to have been exposed to both the consoles as well as the computers. I have a very different take on a lot of these games than most people do. And this game here, this is what I think of when I think of computer platformer, because I think of differently. I always think differently with computers. I love them. To me, this is such a uniquely special game. And it is the best, certainly the best of computer platformers of that era. It would inspire loads of other ones, including a game I've already reviewed, Out of This World / Another World. Wonderful game where the designer definitely got a lot of inspiration from this title right here. You wouldn't see that many actually emulate the complete style of this game because, honestly, as wonderfully unique as this game is, it is so slow. And, just the movements and such, incredibly realistic animation, yes. And you would see that in, lots of games would incorporate the animation, but very few would incorporate the gameplay of that animation. So you would still have complete control over your character, very fast movement. You could control how they jump and such. They didn't want to emulate this style because it is a very, very frustrating style. Wonderful that it's around, wonderful that this unique game is around, but I also completely understand why very few games actually copied it. Let's hop over to Britain from January of 1991 and note the dates for a later point that I'll be making. CU Amiga, the Ultimate Games Guide to the Ultimate Computer. Disclaimer, what I'm about to read is from a British source, so don't get mad at me. In Prince of Persia, we have an example of the contrasting styles of British and American software. Games programmed in Britain tend to suffer from weak design, often the result of a sprint toward the profit line. Even so-called original products can be retarded, a rehash of an ancient game. American software, while not always technically astounding, is often head and shoulders above. Companies like Broderbund, Sierra, Maxis, and Cinemaware have made names for themselves in Europe, America, and Japan, with some titles approaching the million sales mark. Broderbund first rose to fame on the Commodore 64 almost 7 years ago with Karateka, an interactive karate movie. Since then, they produced titles such as Wings of Fury, Typhoon Thompson, and Shuffle Cafe, among others. Prince of Persia is immensely playable. The game owes a lot to the animation and ease of control of the main character. Without this, it would be nothing more than a below-par platform jaunt. All the elements come together extremely well to form a game which is both playable and enduring. One of the most interesting games I've seen in a long time. Mark Patterson, graphics 83%, sound 79%, lastability 87%, playability 88%, overall 87%, £24.95. I'm just happy that they mentioned that it was American. You can have your views on what is best and what is not, but to understand where something comes from is important. And with the Amiga, that rarely happened, and I'm happy that this British magazine actually states where it came from. And there you go. Anybody that thinks Domark was responsible for this one, no. From, I believe, December of 1990. Again, note that date. Advanced Computer Entertainment. Okay, so there's a well-animated guy in a white suit. Big deal. The software bins of Ace are full of games with cute lead characters. What makes Prince of Persia so special? Well, for a start, the excellent animation is integral to the game. When static, Prince of Persia looks a bit on the dull side. Don't be deceived. When it's moving, it's a dream. You've certainly heard games described as like a movie and cartoon-like animation, but for once, it's as true as it ever likely to be with the current level of technology, and the playability, difficulty, and puzzle-solving elements are balanced to perfection. A gem, Jim Douglas, up above the headline, was Broderbund's Prince of Persia is both a masterpiece of animation and a game player's delight for UK licensee, not developer, Domark. Christmas has come early. Base rating of 915. Release details. Amiga. Imminent. Remember those dates. Imminent. December 1990. Now, from March of 1991, a few months later, they take a look at the IBM version, again, published by Domark, not developed by Domark, published by Domark. I think we all believe that, Prince of Persia on DOS was done by Broderbund, don't we? From January of 1991, The One. It's out now, 92% graphics, 90% sound, playability 94%, value 90%, overall 93%, Atari ST, price £24.99, out January of 1991, IBM PC compatibles, $29.99, and out now. From Raze magazine, February of 1991, Prince of Persia is the baby of Jordan Mechner, the young author of Karateka? The base rooms are extremely well constructed, giving players plenty to explore and plenty of apparent dead ends to get themselves out of. The highlight of the game has got to be the animation, though. Working from hundreds of movie clips and digitized poses of 3 live models, Mechner has created the smoothest animation ever in a game of this type. Hundreds of movie clips. Quote. Interesting. The graphics of the Amiga are 93%, a great range of forced 3D backdrops, all beautifully detailed, some of the greatest animation you are likely to see for a long time. Sound, 89%, playability, 91%, 92% overall on the Amiga, 92% overall on the IBM PC. Visually almost identical to the Amiga version. Interesting that they chose that particular wordage there instead of the opposite, isn't it? So I told you to remember those dates because we're going to go back to the beginning when I said that the release date is kind of under question, most notably from the creator, Jordan Mechner. He has a classic game post-mortem that I would recommend watching, and he has, you can buy his journals kind of thing. He wrote all these journals from back in the day, and he's quite active on his, blog kind of thing. And, he's got a lot of thoughts on his game and such.
Oh, God.
Now, Mechner claims a May of 1990 release for the PC and Amiga ports. And not only that, he says by September of 1990 that the Amiga and PC ports had been delisted and recalled. Actually, in all formats, including the AppleII. So there was the AppleII, there was the Amiga, and there was the PC. Delisted, recalled. He claimed that it only sold 10,000 copies in that time period. And it was not until May of 1992, when the winds turned, the Mac version was released. New marketing, a new box, and the European versions had come out. Then it would eventually get more popular everywhere, and it would sell 2 million copies on all formats combined eventually. Now, I read dozens of reviews. There are simply zero actual evidence to support his claim of a May 1990 release for the PC and Amiga formats. There's zero. Now, I am going with his number for the original 1989 release. I think he says something like October of 89. And why am I doing that? Because Computer Gaming World made a review in December of 1989 for the AppleII. It lines up. The dates line up for that date, so I'll go. Trust but verify. And his May 1990 claim also says, despite good reviews, it didn't sell and it was recalled. Well, those great reviews didn't happen in May of 1990. Those great reviews didn't come until the end of the year of 1990, and most reviews for both America and Europe, most of them were in the early months of 1991, by the way. There was just a few magazines that reviewed it prior in 1990. So there's a couple of them specifically in December of 1990, which would say probably it was at least out by November, probably October even. That's it. Those are the reviews we can actually get our hold of. And unless he comes forward with some actual proof besides his journals, I can't go along with that claim. And he says it was Europe that eventually got it popular everywhere. Well, from what I see, Europe and America were making the reviews at about the exact same time, and maybe Europe about a month later, actually. I think he's confusing Apple II sales, which, yes, the Apple II was sort of dying, but remember, there were many models of the Apple II, including the Apple II GS, which they all had something in common, and they all had backward compatibility with the Apple II. It was not uncommon in 1989 to see an Apple II-only game. The only gold box game to be released for an Apple machine was for the Apple II. The original Pool of Radiance was actually ported to the Apple II, late 80s, early 90s there. Instead of the Apple II GS, they went for the one they thought it would sell the most on, didn't they? So I think the 10,000 sales is probably for the Apple II. He's definitely getting dates confused. Absolutely. I'd be willing to believe that perhaps it didn't sell so well in America, which we didn't buy that many platformers on computers. We bought our platformers on the consoles. So, I could see that as being a possibility, but, he's definitely not telling the full truth, or he's getting things mixed up. And you can see that if you look into his statements from back in the day and today. He's doing a little bit of a rewriting of history, I believe. I believe you can trust most of what he says. You got to listen to people, and everybody's different. And I believe he has a lot of information to share on this game, so definitely check out his classic game Postmortem. But some of it, you might want to actually research yourselves. Anyway, I like the game despite not actually having it from back in the day. The only thing I remember in terms of my gaming memories is the screenshots of it in the magazines. I remember from back in the day. I remember looking at that screenshot of him jumping, and it always stuck with me from back then. I wanted this game back then, but I didn't have it. Now, let's point you to a few videos out of this world inspired by Prince of Persia. And how about Dragon's Lair? I think that one would go well for this one. And we'll round that out with the Three Stooges and Marble Madness. Check out my written review, shot97retro.blogspot.com. I'll see you all later. Hope you all enjoyed everything. Goodbye.